Thank you so much, Dan, for such a warm introduction. I'm thrilled to be back as well. I'm going to talk about myself once and once only. There is one copy of Trivial Grievances next to the 100 of the work, so please don't leave me humiliated.
I just want to say up top, I've been touring now for 4 weeks. It has been a roadshow, like funeral for Cool Story. Aww. Every single town I've hit in the signing line, people have told me how devo they are about the show finishing.
Still not as devastated as us.
Yeah.
Oh well, moving on to the actual event of the evening. Before we move on, I'd also like to acknowledge that we're on Wangal country. Sovereignty was never ceded. Now, let's get to Bri. Bri, the best-selling non-fiction author / activist / lawyer / PhD student / former podcaster / weapon. I'm so thrilled to be on stage with you tonight, Bri, to discuss the riveting, horny, pacey, thoughtful fiction taboo, The Work, which is about a lot of things. It's about arts gatekeeping. It's about class. It's also about good old-fashioned romance. And I'm not going to sketch out the entire plot, but it basically follows the ongoing, is it blooming relationship between Lally in New York and Pat in Sydney, Australia. And as I just said, it's about a lot of different things. Bri, what do you think this book is about?
I think this book is about real estate, but I live in Sydney, so I think everything is about real estate. No, I think the book is about, actually, I had a different answer to this question 4 weeks ago, and now that I've been having conversations with, like, I don't even know, 50 meaningful conversations with people about this book in the last month, what I actually think it's about now is about when ambition starts off well and then when it curdles and compromises someone's integrity. So there are two characters in this book. There's Pat, who's in his late 20s. He grew up in regional Queensland and he got a scholarship for high school and got sort of shipped off and the incredible opportunity to go to a rich private school in Sydney. And now he works in the old art world of arts and antiquities in Sydney. And we have Lally, she's in her early 30s and she owns and runs her own art gallery in Chelsea in New York City, and it's modern and contemporary, sometimes like experimental artists. And they're both very ambitious, but Pat is ambitious because he has to be, because he's in a situation of quite dire financial precarity. Whereas Lally is ambitious because so much of her identity is wrapped up in her work. And they're both, that ambition gets themselves into trouble and also fucks shit up. And yeah, I think what I actually think this book is about now, after having so many conversations about it, is when does ambition curdle? When does ambition turn sour?
Bri, you are so smart.
Oh my God.
And also, I am so smart because one of my closing questions was, I actually think let's just do it now, a very compelling thread in this book is ambition.
Yeah.
And I wanted you, now I'm assuming like half the people here have read the book and half haven't.
Show of hands, who's already read it?
Oh, we could almost do a freaking book club. We won't. But we could talk about this book that's interesting for you guys and also not giving it away for the people who haven't read it. Because I think ambition, when I was rereading it, and you know, I've talked to you so much about this book since last year, hence why it was one of my closing questions, because when I thought more about it, I thought this is actually a book about ambition. And what I wanted you to talk about was, what did you think? Because you obviously, when you were writing this book over 5 years, thought about a lot of different things, and you think through things very deeply and you question yourself. You approach things in a very intellectual way. What did you think about ambition at the start of writing this book that had changed by the time you had finished it? Isn't that a great question?
That's such a great question. That is such a great question. You're so smart. It's also a really huge question because actually the book I started writing is completely different to the book I ended up writing. So the answer to this question involves a pretty big tangent. Buckle up. So when I started writing this book, not only did I think that it would have two... So the book is split between these two protagonists who I just introduced you to. They are both, equal players on this chessboard, and the chapters alternate between them. When I started this work back in, thinking about it 2018, started writing it 2019, not only did I think that there would be these two contemporary characters, I also thought that there would be two historical characters that were very much inspired by the real artist Eugene Bongerard, whose father was a portrait miniaturist in the courts in Vienna. And his father taught him that trade. It was very much a trade at the time because they needed portable likenesses of people to be able to take around with them. But when Eugene came of age with this extraordinary skill, it was when daguerreotypes had been developed. And so technology had literally eaten an entire sort of part of an artistic industry. And I was interested in image making across space and time and all of these really intellectual, historical ideas.
Sounds ambitious.
I went really deep into the whole of researching about the eruption in the late 1800s of the volcano Krakatoa. Months of learning about how, for example, the color of the sunset changed after Krakatoa erupted. Anyway, one of the many things was about how Eugene, or his character inspired by Eugene, was very ambitious but was forced to kind of pivot. He came across to the gold fields in Australia in the sort of gold rush era of Victoria. And when his he was engaged to his fiancée, Louise Arns. When she came across after like 2+ years, they got married the day after she arrived. So the questions that I ask about Pat and Lally's long-distance relationship, I thought would be very intellectually mirrored in a different century. Anyway, I was years into researching volcanoes. Hardback books take up most of the bottom shelf hardback books about miniatures, portrait miniatures, take up most of the bottom shelf of my bookshelves at home. There's like folios and folios of research about all this 18th century stuff. And then about 2 years in, I realized I had written almost 200,000 words of really snappy dialogue and really hot sex that was all in the 21st century. And I was like, oh, I realized what I've done here. I had to trick myself. Almost, or at least I had to let the art surprise me, and the art did surprise me. I don't know that I had the confidence in 2019 to just set out to write a contemporary novel. I had to have this whole huge, complicated, serious intellectual structure to feel like I had permission to write fiction. And so to answer your question about how much ambition was a part of it, it wasn't really, because when I started, I think I put the cart before the horse, and one of the reasons this book took 5 years was because I had to go the long way around in realizing that fiction, in my opinion, is all about character and all about creating and knowing intimately who these specific human beings are, not just the kind of really clever themes you want to discuss or the kind of broader socio-political arguments you want to make. At the end of the day, the art doesn't work unless it is compelling on a story level. And it has been a genuine and frankly delightful surprise to me over the last month to realize how much it is about ambition. And I knew, I suppose, that Lally was ambitious, but I didn't think of Pat's ambition in a comparative way. And I didn't think of ambition as a kind of driving force in the book in terms of, like, it was not one of the words I would have picked. I would have picked words like power, capital, desire, and maybe self-grandeur / self-delusion. But yeah, one of the absolute joys of the last month has been hearing so much from other people about what they got from it. And I know as a reader, when I hear authors talk about their work, whether I've read the book yet or I haven't, it kind of shifts my perception of the work. What I didn't realize was that touring a book I had written and hearing the questions other people asked me would shift my perceptions of the book that I had written.
Do you think there's something subconscious about your own relationship to ambition that bled into this book then?
Well, I do think it's, I don't love generational generalizations, but I do think there's something very millennial about this, because we were, quite, something that is relatively unique to our generation was how much we were sold this idea that your work could be a calling, and how much your job could kind of complete, or at the very least augment, your sort of sense of self and your identity. And that was something I was interested in.
Now, I interviewed you a month ago. You keep talking about the past month, and I love that we've bookended it together. I interviewed you at the beginning, a month ago, at the beginning of your tour, and now it's a month later. You've been all over the country. My, how things have changed. Seeing your book at the top of the Booktopia bestsellers list, seeing your book week after week in Dimmick's bestseller list, seeing your book on so many indie store bestseller lists, which always gives me a special thrill, as I know it does you. I always feel like I've achieved something, but anyway. But now that this month has passed, you've already talked about how your perception of your book has changed from all these conversations, but also you have seen your book out in the world. Does this feel like success?
Something I've always said, I remember giving this exact answer, actually, specifically at the Victorian Premier's Literary Awards when Eggy had won People's Choice. And someone asked me some random question about success, or what I imagined success was. And on the spot, I articulated something that I've now identified as true for all of my books, which is that for me, a book specifically will be successful for me or to me if it does well enough that I have sort of earned with that book artistic freedom to write whatever I want to write next. And as long as that has been achieved, my book has done its job. And this book has very much done its job.
But have you felt anything, you think that that's your idea of success, but have you felt anything different in the past month watching its success?
What has happened with this book that I had not felt, it's the biggest book I've had out in terms of, I guess, the reach of it and the reach of the tour and the, I don't know, scale. It's just on a bigger scale than anything I've ever done. And I am very, very aware that whatever level of fame/celebrity I have is like 0.0000001 on like the Richter scale of, see, Krakatoa, on the scale of like people being actually famous. But what I have felt, not just in the last month, but in the last sort of 3 months in the lead up to this book, what I have felt recently is that there is now a spectre, there is a Bri Lee that exists that is not me. And I think it will take me a while to reckon with what that means. And as soon as there is a kind of version of you that is not the human being that you are, people are much freer to project onto it. I remember some like midway step towards it. Actually, I remember you and I having a conversation about this ages ago. And when I hit this was years ago, when I hit approximately 20,000 Instagram followers, people started commenting on my photos about me to each other, as though I wasn't there. And I remember you said to me, this was so many years ago, that you noticed a curdling in the sentiment on, with like, this is a minority of people who followed you on Twitter when you hit approximately 20,000. And it's just this, like, you get to some stage, whatever the arbitrary number is, when
it stops being fun.
Yeah, when it's no longer, oh, I did a thing, and like a big, it's like a machine, and there has been a kind of, for example, every single town or city that I've been to for these events, in the signing line they say that they miss cool story, but in the audience question time there's some variation on like, how do you do it all, what's your secret? And there's a tone and like a vibe shift. There's been a vibe shift towards like whatever people think Bri Lee is. And it's quite difficult to navigate in real time.
So you're going there, so we're going to go there. You and I are friends. We're among friends tonight.
140 close friends.
Yeah, well, who we trust and we know we're not going to take things out of context or spread things maliciously. I was unsure about whether we would go into this tonight because I've been witnessing it as a friend of yours. And, you know, I think a good way in is Annabelle Crabb, a lovely, generous woman who is very supportive of you and absolutely has no malice towards you or anyone. She's
Zero.
A genuinely phenomenal human being and talented at everything she does. Started her endorsement of your book with, well, this is annoying. And I think that sentiment has echoed through so much of the commentary around your book in the past month, and I'm not sure how much people have read. I'm sure some people have read some of it. But if you're not aware, what I'm asking Bri is like, how does it feel to know there's this commentary around that essentially boils down to, Bri doesn't read most of it. She gets people she trusts to tell her what it is, but I've read all of it. Essentially it boils down to, well, the book is good, pretty much great, but I'm so fucking annoyed by her, and they can't actually articulate why. And I know that you feel some of that. And so how has that felt as part of this success? And what does it feel like to you? Is that what it feels like to you?
That's exactly what it feels like, and it feels fucking awful. It feels really, really awful to realize that people still not reflecting on how excruciatingly obviously gendered that is in the year 2024. Really? Really? How tired these narratives are, how few narratives we have for success for women. Something that's a part of that I spoke to you about in Newcastle that I was perhaps naively shocked by was how much everyone has still wanted to talk about Eggy, because I think that we have very few ways of explaining or understanding successful women, and one of them is the trauma narrative. And so it makes sense to people to have some like trauma narrative to explain who or what I am. And frankly, like the fact that I got molested once is the least interesting thing about me. And people like can't let it go. And this vibe, this thing, whatever it is still unfurling in real time. So I'm still grappling with how, like, words to describe it. The Annabelle Crabb quote is such a perfect example because she had nothing but like overwhelming support for me and for this book, and we're not personal friends. She went out of her way to do that out of a kind of professional and artistic sense of generosity. But for her to say, well, this is annoying, it tells me so much about how even on some kind of subconscious, subliminal level, women are still thinking of themselves in competition with each other instead of raising each other up. And that has been, frankly, really fucking disappointing. I hope that I have developed a reputation in my industry, at least, of being someone who has always backed other writers, other emerging and early career writers, especially women writers. And all I have tried to remind myself of throughout this time is that you have to hope that your body of work speaks for itself. That there is just all of this noise now, but that all of the actual individuals I've ever met and worked with know, I guess, who I am and what I stand for. And it's disappointing, but also haters means you know you've made it.
You have.
But like,
It's
what do you do with
It's not
it?
the body of work that speaks for yourself, it's you as a person.
But
as
what do
well.
you do with
Anyone
that
who knows
information?
you.
What would you do with that information? Like, what do you do when people start talking? What would you do if people started talking about you with this weird vibe?
What would I do?
Yeah, like how would it?
I'd bully them. I'd make them cry. I'd find their weakness. But
And
you're a much better
exploit
person than me.
No, I learnt long ago that when people are like weirdly obsessed with you, even a little bit, or like resent you in some way, the ultimate revenge is to not have ever read anything they've written.
Also, the ultimate revenge is that they can't nail you for anything, and I read everything about you in a very protective way, and I do enjoy each article because they can never actually nail anything to you that's bad.
It does, like the result in real time though is like I have to be hyper vigilant in a way that anyone who has even, you know, again, 0.0001% of public profile has to be vigilant, but like I am now aware that there are people who are monitoring my conduct for any opportunity to skewer me for something. And that is like frustrating and petty in like the state of affairs of the world, both nationally and
You can also make
globally.
yourself censor. So thank you for being so generous and honest tonight with our 140
Yeah,
close
please
friends.
don't tweet any of that. Yeah.
Yes,
Thank you.
for Bri. I hope you feel the love more than you feel the jealousy.
Yes, I do.
Okay, good. This has gone real deep.
Yeah. That's not about
This is
the
our
book at all.
conversation
Yeah.
personally between us on the train, not what we were planning to talk in front of an audience about. So back to the book. I always love hearing about what anyone was reading. You spent so long on this book, 5 years writing it, and you've told us about how you started it as one thing and it turned into another. I'm always very curious about what you're reading when you were writing something like this and what you think was influencing you in a literary way.
I remember when I was in New York in 2019 for 5 or 6 weeks researching the kind of New York art scene parts of this. I read both Sally Rooney's back to back for the first time, and I had been reading at that point in time half a dozen books, and I would go on after the Rooneys to read another probably 3 dozen books, which in the years of like 2018, 19, 20, which we would now very clearly, for better and for worse, categorize under the sort of subgenre umbrella as so-called sad girl novels. But at the time, I just felt like I was getting dunked by like wave after wave after wave of like A, really shit sex, B, a lot of youngish people, like millennials, who miraculously didn't have to give a shit about their work or chose not to give a shit about their work.
Oh, how was that? How were they able not to give a shit about their work?
Yeah, so weird. Also, none of them had any parents, really. And they were interesting, but I just felt really frustrated. Almost all of the big decisions I made about the work were informed by what I like reading, not just in relation to writing against the so-called sad girl novel, which like is terminology that I think is not particularly always helpful, but yeah, just when I was at not so much the drafting stage, because that's like loosey-goosey as fuck, like let it all come out none of it's about volcanoes. But at the editing stage, okay, well, what's the point of this? Why is this here? When does it, which characters are more important, etc. I just kept thinking, what do I like reading? I read a lot. I believe truly that your most important job as a writer is to be a reader. And for example, with the sex content, it's been interesting to see on this tour. It's 2024, like we're in an almost post-pornography age, and people have been like, whoa, so much sex scenes in literature. I'm surprised by that. I'm surprised by the kind of prudish response to be so titillated by words on a page, because I find as a reader that I feel very frustrated when I read contemporary fiction in which I am supposed to be compelled by a relationship. It doesn't have to be so-called romance, but in which a relationship, either coming together or coming apart, is a big part of the book, and I don't have any visibility over their sex life. You know, in terms of divorce, for example, specifically, sex and money are the two biggest reasons that people cite as catalysts for divorce. If you give me a book in which a relationship is falling apart and a tasteful cutaway, where they're like kissing and taking off each other's clothes, and then the next morning one of them wakes up and puts the kettle on, how am I supposed to know why this relationship is working amazingly or working terribly or not working at all if I don't know what their sex is like? And so I was reading a lot, not just about portrait miniaturists in the courts in Vienna, but contemporary literature, and there were some parts of it that I loved. I'm someone who thinks all the time, as you know, about sort of work and careers and how we manage our lives. And I was frustrated, and I have conversations about those things with my friends all the time, because frankly, if you live in the 21st century, it's a luxury to not have to think about your career. We are some of the first generations to ever come up where if you are in a hetero or certainly a two-person like household and want children, it's no longer really an option to have a single income household financially. Millennials are the first generation on record to be financially worse off than their parents in Australia. So what does it mean for gender relations that you can no longer have one person stay at home? That changes everything. Like, these things are fascinating to me. And in literature as well, I was reading so many characters that didn't have parents, as I mentioned. And I know when I talk to my friends, you're constantly thinking about your parents, even if they have both passed away, if one of them has passed away, or if you still have both of your parents. When you're in your late 20s and your early 30s, something you're frequently thinking about is what your parents were doing at that age and how your parents are doing now. And especially if you're a woman, like, am I a good daughter? Why do my brothers get treated differently? Or will that inform how I want to treat my kids? Like, constantly thinking generationally. And I just tried to include in my book the things that I was so thirsty for in the contemporary literature that I felt like I was getting hit by at the time.
Which is one of the things I loved about the work, was how honest it was about, you say we're often thinking about our parents, which is true, and it's not just, what were they doing at this age, or those kind of things. It's like, how are they going, how's their health, or thinking of, even thinking about things when you're a kid, or like, are they mad at me, and like, not enough. Why is my mom such a bitch? But you're right, and it really comes through in the work. I think it's a very honest retelling of how much you think about your parents. And I think a lot of people don't realise how much they think about their parents as well. And the other stream that you just touched on was the sex. And what I wanted to specifically ask about that was, yes, you wrote a lot of sex scenes, but what was striking about it to me was how many of those sex scenes were enjoyable, where the woman and the man were both enjoying themselves. And it made me think about how often we're reading about bad, uncomfortable, unsatisfying sex in the past 10 years. And so was that a conscious decision of yours to make it, enjoyable. Breaking sex is fun.
Absolutely, a very deliberate decision on so many levels. Again, writing against what I felt like I was getting just dunked and dunked and dunked by. One of the recurring themes in so much contemporary fiction, especially contemporary fiction written by women, is characters, women characters getting fucked badly by male characters, usually that are a bit older than them. Either a little bit or a lot older than them. And I remember, you know, it's interesting to me, when I started writing this book, I was in my late 20s, the age that Pat is, and now I've finished it and I'm touring it and talking about it, I'm in my early 30s, the age that Lally is. And I remember when I started writing it, thinking to myself, Christ almighty, it's got to get better than this. Like, just the grimness of the bad sex on the page in so many books. Because women character, and this is all obviously very hetero, and my book is very hetero deliberately, but that there's so many of the women characters either can't or don't take an active role in sex. This idea that, and I don't do it anymore, but when I used to talk to school students about consent and respectful relationships, something I tried to drive home to them, and I would repeat it multiple times through every speech, was like, sex is not something that person A does to person B, like subject-object. Sex should be something that two people, I mean, I didn't go two or more, like this was schools, but like sex is something that two equals choose to do together. And if it is person A acting upon person B, there is a dynamic there that is probably not going to result in enjoyable, great times for the parties involved. And I just felt like that A to B dynamic, I just felt so exhausted and frankly fucking depressed about why all of these brilliant women, like just this undeniable wave in literature of this shitty sex recurring. And frankly, like a lot of it was because of the power dynamics in the relationship that come from age gaps. And I remember sitting in this Airbnb in Lower East Side in 2019 and thinking, well, what would happen if I made him the one that was in his late 20s and her the one in her early 30s? And I felt, and I still remember feeling, I felt like the entire book cracked open in front of me. Because as soon as you had the young man be in his late 20s and the young woman be in her early 30s, there is so much difference. Even I imagine them to be approximately 5 years, which is like nothing. If you meet people at a dinner party and it is the absolute norm that there is a few years gap, but it's always the woman that's younger. And when I flipped that, everything got crackly and exciting and charged because they bring different levels of confidence and they bring different levels of capital to the relationship, and the sex benefits from it in a way that now seems to me very obvious, but during the drafting process was so fecund.
I haven't heard you talk about that moment before. I love it when I get to hear something new.
Yeah.
Well, I've been talking to her about this book since last year,
yeah.
And I find all of it interesting, but there's still things that you don't know. Like, this book is so many layers to it.
But you know, like the difference in I hope, like the difference in the types of conversations that straight women or women who have sex with men have in their 20s compared to their 30s about sex is different. Like, just advocating for yourself, communicating what you enjoy and what you don't enjoy. Like, it changes everything.
Yeah, and it definitely comes through in the book as well. It charges almost every sex scene.
Yeah.
That she will not do things that she doesn't enjoy, and she doesn't mind saying what she wants.
Which makes it so much better for everyone. Oh my God. I mean, yeah. Trying to get it through to school students. Get it through to you tonight also.
We are going to go to questions soon, so start thinking about your audience questions, and be prepared to be the first one to put your hand up, because I know, like, we'll have that awkward pause, then someone will put up that hand up, and then there'll be like 20 of you who want to ask a question, because there's so many questions to ask. So I'm going to, after this, I'll call out, we'll get the microphone around. I also wanted to ask, you've written very vulnerable non-fiction, more than one book, although we debate how many books you've actually written between us, because I don't count one as a book. But you've written very vulnerable non-fiction, as has Dolly Alderton, very successful English writer who is our age as well. And she also has gone on to fiction very successfully. And no matter how vulnerable or exposing her non-fiction has been, she has said that she actually writes all her real secrets into her fiction. And if you knew where to look in her fiction, that's where you would see, her deepest, darkest thoughts and reflections. Do you think that's true? Have you hidden your deepest, darkest secrets in this book?
Yes. Who was laughing? Yeah. Okay. Whatever. There's stuff in the book about love that I will never talk about publicly, which is very personal to me. And there's stuff in the book about family that is very personal to me that I will never talk about publicly. And I have been, I think it's fair to say, quite generous, or not generous, I retract that completely, giving with personal information about certain parts of my life. But I genuinely, personally consider myself quite a private person, because in my opinion, the things that are most important to me in my life do not exist in the public sphere at all, to any degree. And it's not so much that there are specific autobiographical details that these characters share, but there are issues and grapplings that I think about frequently that either excite me or trouble me, that I almost use these characters as like lab rats to like test the buttons of, and I do feel that in some ways, I do feel that I've learned from these characters' mistakes. And I also think it's fair to say that because I know what book I'm writing next, I'm already well underway working on it. A book is a huge undertaking. The work took me 5 years. I speak for myself. As an artist, I can only sustain such a massive undertaking of endurance if it is very driven by sort of core questions I have. And it doesn't mean that there's a particular character that's me or a character that's me. What it means is that I have chosen to spend 5 years of my life asking in fiction a question that drives me in my relationships, and the question of ultimately what kind of human do I want to be and what kind of human I think we should all be. And I definitely agree with Dolly Alderton that I think a big difference between non-fiction and fiction is that when people pick up a Bri Lee non-fiction, they expect to receive an argument. They expect to receive a kind of thesis and a point that I'm trying to make. And one of the reasons I think fiction is much better for questions about love and art is that fiction is the place for questions, not for answers. And that feels much more true to life. And it allows space to explore things that I personally have really big, serious questions about. that I could never ever even begin to put in nonfiction.
Well, if that wasn't going to sell someone before. Okay, questions. Yes.
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Maybe she's just right in front of me, and that's why I saw her first. But go on, the Queen Jumper. Yeah. Is this working? Is that on? Yep. Okay. So you speak into that mic, and then I'll repeat your question, and then we'll answer.
I think just closer to your mouth.
What? Just close.
Yep.
Thank you so much, guys, for the talk. It was fantastic. Also, I love that we're matching, Bri, so I got it. I have two brief questions. The first one was that I know you have an artist in the book called Chuck Farr, and I was wondering if you're familiar with the artist Chuck Close, who also has spatial blindness. And the second one is, was that just maybe just a coincidence? The second question is what you were saying about not wanting to leave the reader with answers, not wanting them to think in a particular way. Is there something that you want the reader to feel at the end of the book?
Okay, so the questions was, are you familiar with the artist Chuck Close, who seems to bear a resemblance to the artist in your book? And what is there a feeling you want to leave with your reader at the end of the book?
Okay, so the answer to the first question is quite straightforward, which is that often I get asked, did you mean for this, or did you realise this in your book that you took 5 years to write? The answer is almost always, yes, I meant to write the thing that I wrote. And all of the characters in my book are absolutely fictional, but I was inspired by unsurprising patterns of poor behaviour in not just the visual art world, but all creative industries. The answer to the second part, is there a feeling I hope that the reader would leave with? There's more of a tension that I hope the reader would leave with, which is that I feel like when I was writing this book, it was 5 years of my most cynical self and my most romantic self doing battle. And I think if a reader is a cynical person, they will take that, and if a reader is a romantic person, they might take that. But I hope that whatever sort of 50-50, 70-30, 90-10, 90-10 they are, that that they were challenged on like whatever other bit that they arrived to the book with, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. Next question. Oh, well, we'll go to you next, I promise.
Sorry, I feel like I jumped the queue there.
No, you're fine.
Queue. All good.
I was curious how you feel about romance as a genre. I would argue that looking at the beats of this story, it's kind of a classic structure of the romance. And I think, romance is a pretty broad church. I'm not sure if you've read much in the genre, but I would say that if you are tired of reading books where people are not having good sex, then romance is a great place.
Love this question, thank you.
Wait, repeat the question.
Oh, that's your job.
You repeat. I was too busy laughing about how good the sex is in romance.
Yeah. Okay, so the question was, it started with an assessment, which I think is probably accurate, that the beats that the work hits in terms of the main two protagonists' relationships are very similar to a kind of typical romance genre, like work of fiction, and that if I'm tired of reading bad sex in literary fiction, maybe I should read more romance fiction. Thank you for this excellent question. I have bulk consumed the masterclasses of the thriller and crime and action genre fiction writers, because I don't really believe in this kind of binary of so-called genre fiction and literary fiction, and I certainly do not believe in a hierarchy of those two, if you even believe that they're two different types of fiction. And I am a reader. Again, it comes back to this question, so many of the decisions I made about the work are just informed by what I like reading. And I'm quite an impatient reader. I want to know what happens next. And so I listened to these masterclasses by these genre fiction writers, but none of them were romance writers. I listened to them for plot and pace purposes because I don't think it automatically makes you a sellout to, or I don't know, it doesn't. I don't feel that it compromises my art to consider a reader's experience of the work. And I think you have made an excellent point that my frustration about bad sex on the page could quite easily be solved by reading more broadly. Thank you. Thank you.
And this man here, and then this woman here, and that might be the last question, unless someone makes a very compelling case.
Thanks, Bri. I've thoroughly enjoyed your non-fiction over the past 5 or 6 years. I'm wondering if you found anything different in the writing process, and presumably you did, taking 5 years for the book. I'm wondering whether you could outline your craft and how you took the mistakes you made, your routines, etc., in writing the work.
Great question. I love a craft question. So this was asking about the difference between writing non-fiction and fiction, and also specifically Bri's approach to process, which we all know she must have one.
So I do remember very clearly when I started thinking, I don't know if I can do this, but what I do know that I can do is the research. And that's probably why I sank multiple years into Krakatoa and followed many red herrings. A concrete thing that I can say in hindsight that I've learned that is a difference between non-fiction and fiction is that in non-fiction I felt for myself like I could trust, to a certain degree, the word count. As I worked on a book and the word count ticked upwards, that was an indication of the progress I had made on that book. What I learned the hard way with fiction, well, not the hard way, it's all good, is that the drafting is the research. There was so much left on the so-called cutting room floor with this novel. The first draft of the manuscript was twice the length of the book that came out. That's about 200,000 words. And so much of that was conversations between characters and backstory to characters, in particular for the supporting cast. And in my opinion, a reader can sniff when characters are sort of just marionette puppets or cardboards in order to progress a plot. And the only way you can make people real on the page is to write everything and overwrite about them in the drafting process, because that's how you figure out who those people are, and then it's in the editing process that you hone and hone and hone and shape and shape and shape for like the ultimate reading experience. But then I returned to a similar approach in the late editing stages, I think, where it's a question of pace and just making sure that enough interesting things happen throughout the book that there's no chance for it to lag. A slow or lagging book is similar in, I think, in non-fiction and in fiction. There are some things that are the same and there's some things that are different.
Great, thank you. And last question here.
Thank you, Bri and Bridie. It's been just fascinating listening to both of you, and I can't wait to read my copy of your new book. Bri, if you don't mind me quoting you.
Oh my God. From how many years ago?
From tonight.
Okay.
You said, my book is very heterosexual, deliberately. Could you explain that comment to me, please?
Oh my God, another great question. I also picked up on that. So Bri said that her book earlier was deliberately heterosexual. Please expand.
Yeah, please explain. Well, wow, this is such a great question. This book does, I hope, well, I should rephrase that. I hope this book does a lot of things, asking questions about like ambition in the workplace and families and generational stuff. I am like really, really, I would say 99.5% straight, and have only ever been in relationships with straight people, and I did not feel that this book was the place to sort of add on any extra levels that I was not already very familiar with and knew why and for what purpose I wanted to go there. So that was one of the reasons that, well, there are push factors and pull factors, basically. Like, that was a significant push factor, is that the book kind of already had a lot happening. The pull factor towards the hetero thing again came back to this sort of so-called sad girl fiction and the bad sex and the power dynamics and the age gaps. And when I use that term, cracked open, I think it's kind of a grim indictment of the state of affairs that people find the sex in this book so exhilarating and revolutionary, and the only difference is that it's the woman in her early 30s instead of the man in his early 30s. Like, there is still, I just know from doing non-fiction and academic and advocacy work in the very sort of hetero space of sexual relations, that we are no way near a like post-gender or post-sexual orientation world. For people who are either mostly or fully still having hetero relations, these stereotypes and these cliches are, whether you like it or not, like on your back, and they are baggage that you take everywhere you go. And I wanted to get into the nitty-gritty of that, but ideally in a better way. Not a better way, like a different way than what I was reading a lot of. Yeah. And there was also a bit in Rooney's latest, in Beautiful World, Where Are You? Where my fabulous gay friend Jordan Turner said that there was a character in Rooney's book that felt like forced fake bisexual. And I just think that's the worst thing you can do. If not the worst, God, that's hyperbole, I take that back. But you know, like, if you have a book that's pretty clearly hetero and then you try to shoehorn some
Tokenistic.
Tokenistic, that's the word, yes, thank you, tokenistic. You try to shoehorn some kind of queer bit into there.
Oh my God, I so agree with Jordan on that.
Yeah.
It
When
stuck
it's like,
out
oh,
so much.
he's been like, anyway, well, that's a tangent. But I think, like, the call has to come from inside the house. And I, live in a straight house, so I'll make the call.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Bri. And thank you everyone here tonight. Please join me in thanking Bri for honesty tonight.